Let me be direct with you from the outset, because what happened in Baghdad 48 hours ago demands directness. Everyone is focused on the airspace closure. Everyone is asking whether this is a diplomatic protest or a temporary measure, but that is not the real story. What we are witnessing is not a policy disagreement between Washington and Baghdad. It is not a negotiating tactic. What we are witnessing is the structural collapse of America's entire Middle Eastern military architecture. I am sitting here looking at a flight tracking data report that has been circulating among regional military analysts for the past 72 hours, and I need you to understand what it shows. It does not show commercial aircraft being rerouted. It does not show delayed cargo flights. What it shows is 23 American military transport missions that were scheduled to transit Iraqi airspace between April 9th and April 11th, 2026, and every single one of them was either canceled, rerouted through significantly longer paths over Turkey and Jordan, or, in 3 cases, turned back mid-flight. 23 missions, 0 successful transits. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why Iraq's decision represents the death of American logistics supremacy in the region, why this creates an operational crisis that cannot be solved through diplomacy alone, and why your tax dollars are about to fund the most expensive military restructuring since the end of the Cold War. This is the Professor Marandi Report. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by Pentagon strategists right now. This is not speculation. This is operational reality. 2. Context setup, 1:30 to 4:05. Let's start with geography, because understanding the map is essential to understanding why this decision changes everything. Iraq sits at the geographic center of what military planners call the Central Command Theater. To the west, Syria and Jordan. To the east, Iran. To the south, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the Persian Gulf. To the north, Turkey. Every single major American military operation in the region for the past 20 years has depended on the assumption that Iraqi airspace would remain accessible. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. According to data from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the United States currently maintains approximately 2,500 troops inside Iraq officially, but operates logistics through Iraqi airspace to support an additional 30,000 personnel across the region. That includes roughly 10,000 troops in Syria, 13,000 in Kuwait, 3,500 at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, and approximately 3,000 naval personnel rotating through the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. Every one of these deployments depends on a logistics chain that until 48 hours ago ran directly through Iraqi airspace. The distances matter. From Ramstein Air Base in Germany to Al Udeid in Qatar, the direct route through Iraqi airspace is approximately 4,200 kilometers. The alternative route avoiding Iraq entirely, transiting through Turkish airspace, then south through Jordan, then east into the Gulf, adds between 800 and 1,200 kilometers depending on specific flight paths and weather conditions. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a 20 to 30% increase in flight time, fuel consumption, crew fatigue, and operational costs for every single logistics mission. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about what Iraq actually did and why it represents something far more significant than a temporary diplomatic maneuver. Act 3, first reveal, 4 to beta. Announcement number 1, the closure is comprehensive and legally structured. And this one matters more than anything else because it is not a protest. It is policy. On April 10, 2026, the Iraqi Civil Aviation Authority, operating under direct orders from Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, issued Executive Aviation Directive 2026-04A. The directive states explicitly that all military aircraft operating under United States Department of Defense authorization are prohibited from entering Iraqi sovereign airspace until further notice. The language is precise. It does not say American aircraft are unwelcome. It does not request that the United States reduce flight operations. It prohibits entry. Full stop. According to reporting by Reuters and confirmed by statements from Iraqi Transportation Ministry spokesman Khalid Al-Tayeh, the directive was communicated to the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad at 14 hours local time on April 9th, with enforcement beginning at midnight on April 10th. Al-Tayeh stated publicly, and I am quoting him directly here, that the decision was made in coordination with Iraq's National Security Council and reflects the government's determination to exercise full sovereign authority over its airspace in accordance with international law. The Pentagon has acknowledged the closure. Defense Department spokesperson, Major General Patrick Ryder, confirmed in a press briefing on April 11th that the United States is working with regional partners to ensure continued logistics operations. That phrasing is important. He did not say the closure is temporary. He did not say negotiations are underway to reverse it. He said the United States is adapting to ensure continued operations. That is acknowledgement of a new operational reality. Iraq currently represents the most critical airspace corridor for U.S. military logistics between Europe and the Persian Gulf. According to Defense Security Asia, between 40 and 60% of all American military cargo flights supporting operations in Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain transit Iraqi airspace. That percentage matters. It means that nearly half of everything the U.S. military moves into the region by air, ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies, personnel rotations, technical equipment is now being rerouted through significantly longer and more expensive flight paths. Received. That is announcement number 1. Act 4, Complication, 8/13 Sao. Announcement number 2, the alternative routes are not sustainable. This is the part Pentagon logistics planners have confirmed privately but will not state publicly. The primary alternative route transits through Turkish airspace. Turkey is a NATO ally. Turkey hosts American forces at Incirlik Air Base. But Turkey is also a country that has spent the past 3 years systematically distancing itself from American Middle Eastern policy. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has made very clear that Turkey's cooperation with the United States is transactional, not ideological, and the price of that cooperation is rising. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the strategic implications become impossible to ignore. According to Bloomberg reporting from April 12th, Turkish officials have already communicated to the U.S. Department of Defense that increased flight traffic through Turkish airspace will require renegotiation of overflight fees and operational permissions. The current agreement allows a maximum of 40 military cargo flights per month through Turkish airspace without additional approvals. That quota was designed for supplementary logistics, not primary logistics. The United States is now attempting to reroute approximately 120 to 150 flights per month through Turkey. The math does not work. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly, Jordan is the only truly reliable alternative, and Jordan cannot handle the volume. Jordan has been one of America's most consistent partners in the region. King Abdullah II has maintained close security cooperation with Washington, even when it has been politically unpopular domestically. Jordan allows American aircraft to transit its airspace. Jordan hosts American training facilities. But Jordan is a small country with limited airspace capacity, and it is surrounded by countries that are increasingly hostile to American military presence. According to analysis published by the Middle East Institute on April 13th, Jordanian airspace can accommodate approximately 60 to 80 additional American military flights per month before air traffic control systems become saturated and before the political costs to the Jordanian government become unsustainable. The reason this number is significant is the same reason the Turkish numbers are significant. The United States needs to reroute somewhere between 120 and 150 flights per month. Turkey can handle 40 without new agreements. Jordan can handle 60 to 80 before overwhelming its systems. Even combined, the two countries cannot fully replace the logistics capacity that Iraqi airspace provided. The operational result is a logistics bottleneck that cannot be solved through incremental adjustments. The United States is now facing a choice between 3 options. Option 1, negotiate with Iraq to restore airspace access by making concessions on American troop presence inside Iraq. Option 2, accept significantly reduced logistics capacity and downsize regional deployments to match the new reality. Option 3, invest billions of dollars in alternative logistics infrastructure, expanded airlift capacity, pre-positioned stockpiles, and potentially new agreements with other regional countries. None of these options are quick. None of them are cheap. And all of them represent strategic retreats from the assumptions that have guided American military planning for 2 decades. Received. That is announcement number 3. Chasintiteni, Act 5, Counter-narrative, 13, Arkin 16, Ow. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The story they are covering is the diplomatic story, Iraqi frustration with American military presence, political pressure from Iran-aligned factions inside the Iraqi parliament, Prime Minister Soudani balancing between Washington and Tehran. That story is true, but it is incomplete. The story they are not covering is the structural story. Iraq closed its airspace not because it is angry with the United States, though it is. Iraq closed its airspace because it has calculated that the United States can no longer effectively retaliate. Think carefully about what this represents. When a country that depends on American military aid, American diplomatic support, and American economic engagement decides to impose operational costs on the United States military, that is not a tantrum. That is a strategic assessment. It is an assessment that the costs of cooperation now exceed the benefits. The Biden administration responded by calling for dialogue and expressing disappointment. The Trump administration, in its previous term, might have responded with threats of sanctions or withdrawal of aid. This time, there were no threats. There was a call for dialogue. That tells you everything you need to know about how Washington itself has assessed the balance of power. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States conducts military operations across an entire region, and a country positioned at the geographic center of those operations closes its airspace, and the United States responds by asking for dialogue rather than imposing consequences, that is not ambiguity. That is not diplomatic nuance. That is a verdict. The verdict is that Iraq believes the United States needs access to Iraqi airspace more than Iraq needs American approval. And Iraq is not wrong. If you operate a business that depends on logistics, you already understand this. If you have ever managed a supply chain, you know that redundancy is expensive and choke points are dangerous. The United States built its entire regional military infrastructure on the assumption that Iraq would remain accessible. That assumption is now gone, and rebuilding logistics networks around that new reality will take years and cost billions. If you are an American taxpayer watching your government spend $850 billion per year on defense, what is happening in Baghdad is not a foreign policy story. It is a budgetary story. Because every flight rerouted through Turkey or Jordan costs more fuel, more crew hours, more maintenance, and more money. And those costs are permanent unless Iraqi airspace is restored. Acti 6, historical parallel, 16 to 17 Meo. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. Athens and Sparta went to war. The war lasted 27 years. Both sides were exhausted. Tens of thousands died. Infrastructure was destroyed. Economies collapsed. And who won? Persia. Persia did not fight in the Peloponnesian War. Persia funded whichever side was losing to prolong the conflict. And when Athens and Sparta had bled themselves into mutual exhaustion, Persia imposed terms on both of them. The parallel is exact. The United States has spent 20 years fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It has spent trillions of dollars. It has maintained military presence across the Middle East to counter Iran, to counter terrorism, to secure energy supplies, to project power. And what has happened? The countries it occupied, the countries it rebuilt, the countries it spent blood and treasure to stabilize, are now closing their airspace and asking America to leave. Iraq is not Persia in this analogy. Iraq is the battlefield. But the principle is the same. The exhausted power loses control not because it is defeated militarily, but because it can no longer sustain the costs of maintaining dominance. And when the costs exceed the benefits, even allies begin to defect. Act 7, Prediction and CTA, 17-20 call. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, negotiated restoration. The United States negotiates with Iraq to restore airspace access. The price will be a clear timeline for withdrawal of American combat forces from Iraqi territory, increased Iraqi control over security operations, and likely some form of acknowledgement that the 2003 invasion and subsequent occupation were errors. This path requires the United States to accept a diminished presence in Iraq in exchange for maintaining logistics access. Likelihood, moderate. The Biden administration may be willing to make these concessions. The question is whether domestic politics allow it. Path 2, strategic downsizing. The United States accepts that it can no longer maintain current force levels in the region and begins a phased drawdown of deployments in Syria, Kuwait, and potentially even Qatar. Forces are consolidated in fewer locations with more robust logistics infrastructure. This path represents an acknowledgement that American military dominance in the Middle East is no longer sustainable at current costs. Likelihood higher than officials will admit publicly. The Pentagon has been conducting exactly this kind of analysis for the past 3 years. Iraq's airspace closure may accelerate decisions that were already being debated internally. Path 3, escalation and infrastructure investment. The United States refuses to accept either negotiated concessions or strategic retreat. Instead, it invests heavily in alternative logistics infrastructure, expanded agreements with Jordan and potentially Saudi Arabia, increased pre-positioned equipment stockpiles, and possibly even new base construction. This path is the most expensive and the slowest, but it allows the United States to maintain regional presence without depending on Iraqi cooperation. Likelihood, low in the short term, but possible in the medium term if domestic political support for continued Middle Eastern engagement remains strong. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest. The United States is tired. The American public is tired. The costs of maintaining Middle Eastern dominance are rising while the perceived benefits are falling. Iraq's airspace closure is not the cause of American strategic retreat. It is a symptom. The cause is 20 years of wars that did not achieve their objectives, trillions of dollars spent on conflicts that did not end, and a gradual recognition that the unipolar moment is over. But here is the complication. Even if the United States wants to downsize its presence, it cannot do so cleanly. It has commitments to Israel. It has concerns about Iran's nuclear program. It has relationships with Gulf monarchies that depend on American security guarantees. Leaving the region entirely is not an option. The question is not whether the United States maintains a presence. The question is what kind of presence it can afford and what kind of presence regional actors will tolerate. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, how long can the United States sustain rerouted logistics operations before costs force strategic changes? Second, will other countries follow Iraq's example and begin imposing restrictions on American military access? Third, what does a sustainable American presence in the Middle East look like in 2030 if current trends continue? Tell me in the comments what you think the administration does next. Tell me if you think this is a temporary closure or the beginning of permanent change. We will keep tracking every development in Baghdad, Ankara, Amman, and Washington. That is what the Professor Marandi Report does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what American strategic retreat actually looks like in practice. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next report.